The member for Melbourne Ports.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Australian campuses have become the front line in an ideological war with our great trading partner, China. Our universities will have to start reconciling their scholarly values with the political campaigning of their largest customer, China. Recently, President Xi Jinping started to try to return his country to the commanding heights of Chinese education. He told teachers to educate and guide their students to love the motherland, love the people and love the Communist Party of China. Xi Jinping said overseas Chinese have red-hot patriotic sentiment. The Communist Party's war against liberal values in China and its growing international reach present Australia with a challenge we've not seen before. The challenge for the democratic world is that President Xi's deepening struggle against liberal values in China do not end at their borders. Most challenging for us, Xi made it clear that his primary enemies are liberal values that undermine his own political system. That's the view of former adviser to Prime Minister Turnbull, John Garnaut, in this week's Financial Review. How does it affect Australia? Garnaut's great insight is little understood by avaricious university bureaucrats who only want overseas fees from Beijing-approved students. Core institutions like the United Work Department are exporting this ideological battle around the world. As I quoted, President Xi said overseas Chinese have red-hot patriotic sentiment, and Beijing's Ministry for Education has issued new instructions to its counsellors at diplomatic missions around the world: build a multi-dimensional contact network linking home and abroad, the motherland, embassies, consulates, overseas student groups and a broad number of students. As Garnaut argues, and as the Lowy Institute has as well, there are great challenges in our Australian universities because of this. In recent months we've seen denunciations of Australian university lecturers who have offended Beijing's patriotic sensibilities. A lecturer at the ANU was excoriated in a Chinese language social media for insensitively displaying the warning, "I will not tolerate students who cheat." A lecturer at the University of Sydney was castigated for using an online map which, if you looked extremely closely, showed an Indian demarcation of a Himalayan border. There can be no doubting the pressure on universities to fill classrooms with full fee-paying students, generate private donations and rise in research rankings. But as Garnaut argues, to manage these risks, our universities will need to reach out to alienated students, fix the failures of integration, improve their products. They'll need full-spectrum resilience strategies to shore up vulnerabilities and to uphold the principles of open and critical inquiry on which they're built. Most of all, they'll have to look at what the Beijing authorities are doing on their campuses, on Australian campuses, and do a better job of hearing what it says. Alex Josky, a student at the ANU, recently cemented what Mr Garnaut said, saying that the Chinese Communist Party exploits the isolation of students that he met at the ANU. Dissenting students fear speaking out because further isolation they may face if their fellow Chinese students rule them persona non grata. It means they hardly come into contact with the ideas that underline the great democratic society of Australia. Some campuses, societies, exacerbate a mentality of divide between students from the mainland and local students. It encourages them to consider anyone who deviates from the party line as the enemy. Now, recently we had a disgraceful national luxury car protest of Bentleys, Lamborghinis and Maseratis driving past an Indian Independence Day thing with provocative slogans targeting in a sort of Chinese patriotic sentiment, including the slogan, "Anyone who threatens China, no matter how far, must be killed." These kind of sentiments are intolerable, Speaker. We welcome overseas students to Australia. They've been on university campuses ever since I was at university, and that's a long time ago. But we need to make sure that they can operate in freedom and that they're not overly arm-twisted by embassies or consulates. We've also had the problem of donations that was in the Herald Sun. When you overlay this with the purchase of nearly all the Chinese language press in Australia, the funding of faux think tanks, you can clearly see Beijing's wish to intervene in Australian foreign policy. This well-funded donation strategy, the campus strategy, shows a prolonged influence operation by Beijing. It's a distinct issue from how Australians should view Chinese investment by people and entities on the mainland in Australia. We should have a colourblind attitude to Chinese investment, but we should have a separate and different debate on the various political influence operations in Australia.
The member